それではセミナーを再開。
So let us resume the seminar. So we would like to now entertain questions from the floor, and lecturers would respond to those questions. And as to the coordinator for the QA, we have from Mr. Higa, the director of the JC Soken, who is also a co-sponsor of this organization, and he will be the coordinator of this session. Thank you very much. I'm Higa, and JC Soken also includes the fishery cooperative and the forestry cooperative, as well as the labor cooperatives as well. It is such a comprehensive research institute for all these different types of cooperatives. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk to you today. And now I would like to serve as MC so that your questions, which were submitted earlier, will be responded. But Mr. Vaso had introduced us about this UK situation, and he would like to give some additional remark to what he has explained about the UK situation of the Northern Rock situation. Thank you.
Is it on? Yeah? Okay. Yes, I understood that maybe you need a bit more information on what I quoted about Northern Rock. So what I don't want to get into every detail of this story, because Northern Rocks is very symptomatic of an old process that came about now 20 years ago. More, yeah, that makes us a bit older in the UK. At that time, in UK, there was a special type of banks, which name is building societies, that are cooperative banks dedicated for thrift and making loans to build houses. Okay, so and they were ruled by cooperative principles, democratic, one person, one vote, and most important things is intangible reserves. I know it might sound strange to you, so some explanation on intangible reserves. Intangible reserves for us co-ops are something which are very important, different from capital shares. To start a co-ops, you need to put in some capital to start by buying shares. But shares are redeemable. That is to say, when you are free to enter a co-op, you're free to quit a co-op. Whenever you go out, you get back your capital. This is the capital shares. But in between, when the co-ops run its business, you make some yearly profit. And those profit, it is decided by the co-opters at the General Assembly. What do we do with this profit? A part of it might be to serve an interest to the shares, a very small interest, to keep the value of the shares, especially when there is inflation. Of course, things are different when there is no inflation, but whatever. And secondly, the other part of the annual profits are kept inside the co-ops. What do we do in co-ops with this wealth? We keep it to either expand the co-ops or to expand the business of the co-ops. So it is a liability to go back on accountings, which I said I like. So this is intangible. That is to say, whenever you come out of an individual, you get out of the co-ops, you don't get any part of these reserves. It is for the community. It is for, because when you get in, you don't pay for the accumulated reserves, and when you come out, you don't get anything from the accumulated reserves, intangible reserves. So it is important. This is the difference with capitalistic way of doing things. When you go on the stock exchange, when you buy your share, in the price you buy, you not only buy the value of the capital, but you buy a part of the wealth of the reserves of the company. You don't do that when you get into a co-op. So you might get into a co-op which is 100 years old, very wealthy, because 3, 4, 6 generations of corporates are left some reserves there, some profits, and that's the intangible reserve. So it's very easy to understand. What is the process of demutualizing? It's not only a question of principles attacking autonomy, attacking democracy. It's, of course, it's just a robbery. It's just a robbery. It might be a legal robbery, but a robbery is still a robbery, whatever you call it. So what you decide is that you say the Commonwealth will be privatized, will be given to someone. So usually what happened in Northern Rock, it was the same in the other building societies. It was said to the people, if you're poor, it's because the co-op is rich. Okay? So us, the UK government at that time, we will turn you rich. Okay, how shall we turn you rich? By giving you the Commonwealth individually, that is, shifting from co-ops to limited company, to a private-owned company. It sounds wonderful. How can you turn someone rich with nothing? In fact, it's because nobody understood in that path that the Commonwealth was something to be cherished and to be developed. But of course, something that was not told to them. They were given a share for cheap price. But what they didn't know is that behind that, there was greed from some people. So it was very clearly described by a wonderful report made at that time by ICMF. And I know because I was in that process of working. It's exactly what happened in 2008 failure, financial. Greed of someone greed is always behind that. So that was what is called in UK carpet beggars. What are the carpet beggars? People that go around houses and telling you, oh, you have all rubbish in your attics. I will buy the bulk of your attics for a cheap price. But they know that in your attics, your grandparents have left some old things, old furniture, old paintings and so on. So they buy you for quite nothing. But when they get the bulk, they look around and they discover that in the old painting, there are some old Picassos. You know, at that time they were worth nothing. So, okay, and they take the Picasso and they sell it in the auctions and they make the profit for them, not for the community, not for the co-op. So this is exactly what happened to Northern Rock. The people were given, the co-opters were given some shares, and some people came in and tell, sell them to me very cheap, and we will list the company and so on. And so they ran it so wonderfully, they collapsed, and then all the poor guys that were given the shares and that got them for quite nothing, that to pay back through taxes for the government to buy back Northern Rock. And now Northern Rock has been a national company. So you see, that's the most difficult thing maybe to understand. This is why education is so important. It's not only a legal matter. It's a question of finance. It's a question of money. Who owns the money and to whom the money is serving. So that's the story of Northern Rock. You can expand it in many different countries.
Can I? It's a really good story, and it's great to hear a Frenchman telling an English story. But I have to say that one thing I just wanted to reinforce: there's still a healthy building society movement in the UK, because some of these carpetbaggers were unable to persuade the members of our largest building society, the Nationwide, which was initially the Cooperative Building Society. because the cooperative movement came out in their thousands across the country, tens of thousands, and voted against. And so the carpetbaggers never got their hands on that one. All those that were carpetbagged have now disappeared entirely from the UK. They've all collapsed in the financial collapse. There's no longer, their brand has completely disappeared so they are no more. And all that years and years and tens and 20s of years of keeping this money going for the future generations to buy their homes with disappeared. Thank goodness there are still 45 very good building societies in the UK.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think this was very helpful to deepen our understanding. Now, let me start accommodating the questions from the audience. There have been many people asking questions. Many people asked about what happened after the International Year of the Cooperatives. After the UN year, has the government attitude changed, and what has actually happened in this context? Were there new legislations and systems to support and promote cooperative movement? I believe that is the global trend. So if you could cite some examples to explain to us that indeed the other governments and nations are pro-cooperative movement. So if you could share with us the current development. Let me turn to Dame Pauline and then Monsieur Marcel.
Well, thank you very much. First, it's important to say that during the International Year of Cooperatives, one of the key demands the United Nations made on all governments was that they should review their cooperative legislation to make sure it was up to date, to make sure it wasn't prescriptive, but it was enabling. In other words, the tendency in some countries, well, let's put it this way. In some countries, there was discrimination against cooperatives. They couldn't you couldn't have a bank incorporated in some countries as a cooperative. Under the definition small and medium enterprises, cooperatives weren't there. They weren't included. Those things happened often by accident, an accident of history, the way in which the legislation on cooperatives grew. So what the UN was saying is look at your legislation, make sure all those discriminations end, and what's more, try and develop some legislation that sets the general cooperative trend for all sectors. Because the other thing that happened was some countries have very detailed prescriptive legislation for each sector. So they were asking us, every country, every nation, to open up this and create much more generic cooperative legislation that was enabling and empowering for ordinary folk. It's been a lot of work on that. Many, many dozens of countries have reviewed their legislation, including my own, which is the first time for about 100 years that the UK has had a new cooperative law. It used to be called the Industrial and Provident Society Law. It's now called the Cooperative and Communities legislation, so at least we say it what it is. And that's happened in many countries. Some of the most exciting things are, for instance, in India, the Indian government changed their constitution to include the right of every Indian to start a cooperative as a sort of fundamental right of citizenship, which is quite an interesting thought, quite different to anything anybody else did. But in many countries, the legislation's been improved and updated, and that's very much to be welcomed. In terms, do you want me to look at the sort of issues of the promotion of cooperatives, or is that a separate question? Because cooperatives. Do you want to do more on?
Maybe I want to add on this question on well, it's not an overall process, but at least a few couples of ideas just to complement on Pauline's discussion. You're right, and ICA is on its side trying to help the governments to work on this process. So inside the ICA, we have launched a legislative committee It is chaired by Mr. Hagen Henry, who has been working for many years. He's from Finland. He's been working for many years in ILO, and he knows very well. And there are different persons being part of this. Already there are some international documents that might be useful. And of course, I'm seeing Mr. Kurimoto there, Professor Kurimoto, and there has already been a huge book of legislative compendiums. And so this is an ongoing process which is interesting. Two things which I believe might be useful. Pauline was explaining you that India, for example, has decided to introduce in its constitution a right for co-ops. For example, in the Italian constitution, there is an article telling that co-ops have to be respected. And it is nowadays very useful because there is some problems in Italy. And it's not only relying on principles, it's relying on the national constitution. So it's important. Secondly, as Pauline is telling, the trend is not too much too detailed. We believe it's better to enable, that is to say, to have a wide legislative, not getting into each sectors. And the third thing I want to add, it is important when thinking of the expansion of the cooperative movement. It's, of course, legislative work, but not only. There are new sectors which are very important to expand in. Of course, the idea, agriculture is not only farmers. Agriculture is not only farmers. It's not only producing grains. It's transforming grains. It's getting down into the chain. And of course, the very important question to tackle now for the co-ops, the agriculture co-ops, how do we work with cooperative co-ops? At the international level, what do we do on this question of fair trade? How do the producers from the south do work on equitable basis with the consumers of the north countries? But it's not only north-south. Now in France, we're expanding on the question of fair trade inside France. What does that mean to be fair trade inside France? So there should be passed down on doubling the incomes of the farmers. Just keep this idea. New sectors, energy, okay? In many countries, renewable energy, air wind, air mills, and so on, it is a wonderful place for the co-ops to expand. Social co-ops, it has been developed in Italy. Now it's expanding around. So I believe in many fields there are many capacities to expand. And this is what the blueprint of the ICA is all about.
Just to complete that, of course, we do have in Europe one other very useful regulatory and legislative forum, and that's the EU. And in the EU treaty, cooperatives are specifically recommended and supported. So it's been very helpful for us when we've been bringing new member states in from Eastern Europe, from the former Soviet in areas of influence, because some of them, for historical reasons, have been antagonistic to cooperatives, because clearly it was part of a Soviet state. And so what we've been able to do is to prevent the destruction of the cooperative movement in those countries by saying, if you're coming into Europe, you are obliged to support cooperatives. You may not destroy your cooperative movement. It's against the EU treaty. And that's been a very helpful tool for us in trying to help and support our cooperative colleagues in those countries who've been transforming their cooperative movement from the old-style cooperatives to modern-day cooperatives in their countries.
Thank you very much. Speakers have cited the developments, advancements in different countries, and also they refer to the emergence of new sectors and new cooperative movement. Let me turn to Professor Yanagisawa. cooperators have this sense of crisis as they witness this development. However, apparently the general public is not really aware of this, keen on this. Why is this? How can we enhance the awareness of the people at large? What can we do? So, Professor Yanagisawa. Thank you. What I'm going to share with you are strictly my personal view. It does not represent the view of the academic society. Simple. In Japan, the awareness level of the cooperative or corporate movement is so low. There's 80 million members. There's 80 million members, but they don't recognize that they are members of the cooperative. Then Rosai, Professor Odawa, conducted a survey about the awareness, and it was so poor. They have JCCU stores, agricultural cooperative stores, but they don't see a difference between these commercial supermarkets and the cooperative stores because there were no training and education done in the school system, and there were no PRs. So can we just do the external communication, publicity? But that alone will not be enough to really enhance the awareness, the recognition of the value of the cooperatives. I have 3 ideas. I'm sure there are many of you who are cooperatives. You have some big organizations, agricultural cooperatives and other cooperatives. But in and outside, there are many collaboration amongst the members of the agricultural cooperative movement. They work together to provide care, health care, social care. Even if they recognize that they are a cooperative, but people are working together in solidarity. So there are many good examples of solidarity and cooperative movement, if you will. So infrastructure must be built to promote this. The second point is
the basic law is not available for the cooperatives, and Japan is maybe the only country that does not have that law, because it's actually governed by the other different discipline laws. In Korea, 2 years ago, they enacted this cooperative law, basic law, and then many cooperatives are born in the Korea. Maybe good ones and bad ones, but that's okay. They have numerous cooperatives born, and they could be supporters for the spirit. So we have to enact the basic law for the cooperatives. We had to be in alliance with these other specific laws in Japan, but legal system must be prepared. In other words, the legislation is the area where we have to work hard as the cooperators. And then so in order to realize these things, for example, the cooperative UK is an example, which is so powerful. The Japanese cooperative organization should have something similar to the UK. So what's the issue now? And then how can we do in the same way as the UK organization? So those are the things we have to clarify as something we have to do in Japan. So small cooperatives must be combined. Infrastructure organization should be created to support that organization. The basic law for the cooperatives must be enacted in Japan as well, so that we, the cooperative, the colleagues, should have the strategic workforce or groups, which is necessary. Japanese policy makers now are doing something reverse to, contradictory to the global trend to cope against such government trend. Policy trend. We have to be more serious in preparing ourselves. The 21st century is the time for, and without a mutual aid organization, the society cannot no longer survive in this century. I have lots of comments to make on this, but the time is so short, so I can comment on the details of that later, maybe. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yanagisawa. Very clear-cut proposal for us. So that was a question to Professor Yanagisawa. The same question to the Miss Green. Do you have any idea, especially with regard to blueprint you have published? What do you think of this point raised by Professor Yanagisawa?
We all have to acknowledge that we in the cooperative movement around the world are very good at talking to ourselves. We're not actually very good at talking to people who are not in the movement. And this has been one of the reasons, to be perfectly frank, why our influence has deteriorated nationally and globally across the world. So during 2012, the International Year of Co-ops, while we were celebrating the year, the ICA developed the blueprint for a cooperative decade. And this was overwhelmingly adopted at the end of the year by the entire movement. So it's not the ICA's strategy, it's the strategy for the movement. And what it does, it sets out 5 key themes. And it says if we concentrate on developing those 5 key themes, by 2020, cooperatives will be acknowledged as the leading player in environmental, social and economic sustainability. We will therefore be the model preferred by ordinary people, and hence we will be the fastest growing model of business. So that's the ambition, which is very, very ambitious. But this is the time when, if we're ever going to achieve a real breakthrough in cooperative growth around the world, it's now. Despite what's happening here in Japan, it's now. This is the moment. So I hope that you can capitalize on this. And one of the things the blueprint does, for instance, we say we're the most democratic business model in the world. We want people to participate, but we don't talk to people, just ourselves, just the ones who are cooperating. So what we're saying is, look, it's time. The time is right now. We have all these new tools given to us by the IT revolution to communicate, to pull people into our ambit, young people, women, people who are amongst the most disadvantaged in the communities. This is the time when we can use all these new tools to talk to them about what cooperatives do. I've often said to the Director General of the ICA, if we could just have the funding for 12 young people in different parts of the world who would constantly be flooding social media with short messages about the co-op movement, not in any sort of ideological way, but about what it does for people's lives, we would change the nature of people's feelings. We would change the nature of people's understanding of our movement. You know, in the United States, after the financial collapse, there was a massive campaign to get people to change their money from commercial banks to credit unions. And on the 5th of November 2011 was called Big Switch Day. And tens of millions of Americans changed their bank accounts from the commercial banks to the credit unions. That was started by one message, by one woman in California, who put a message on Facebook saying, I don't know why people are still in commercial banks. That's the interest rate you're paying there. And this is the interest rate that the credit union is giving. And that went viral. And that was what led to the whole campaign to switch your money, to change your bank accounts. That's how easy it is to change people's view and to open up their understanding. During the Occupy movement in Quebec, I was in Ottawa for a Canadian event. Big tented community outside the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, the Occupy Ottawa movement. And a young man from the Canadian Cooperative Association just walked down to that tented community to look around. And people started talking to him. And they asked him what he did. He said, I work for the Canadian Cooperative Association. And they asked him to come back on Saturday and hold a seminar on what cooperatives could do for young people. And when he got back, there were 250 young people waiting to hear his talk at the seminar. So this is what we need to do. We need to pull these people into our orbit. So we're saying to members, you think your cooperative is the best, most democratic model of business in your community. Well, open it up. Start talking online to your community about what they think your cooperative's doing right and doing wrong. Ask them, you want to invest in something in the community. Is this the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? You're not asking them to decide. The members decide. But start engaging them in the conversation, because that way you will make more people members, aware of what you're doing. And slowly but surely, the mood will change. On young people, one of the things we've done in the United Kingdom to very good effect, and it's all happened in about 7 years, is that our government, the last Labour government actually, changed the law to allow schools to be partly funded by external bodies, not by government. So we didn't want to interfere in this at all because we didn't really approve of what they'd done. But when we saw big commercial businesses starting to fund schools, we thought, OK, we need to put the cooperative movement into this. So we set up one flagship school. It was a very deprived school in a deprived area. And the cooperative movement, with the support of the Cooperative College, established a very strong presence for the cooperative movement in the curriculum, but also in the way the children reacted to each other, and the way they were engaged by the teachers, and how the parents were engaged in the school as part of the cooperative. There are now nearly 1,000 cooperative schools in the UK. We have hundreds of millions of pounds now, educational assets, now in the hands of cooperative schools. Huge success, because the ethos of cooperation, teachers like it. You think about it, why wouldn't they? Working together, self-responsibility, self-help, care for the community, all these things are part of the ethics of teachers as well. So they really love it, and they've adopted the model, and it's flying. And what's happening now is we're getting people going to college wanting to learn about cooperatives from schools, which is what's been missing. Business school, you can go through a business school all the way through and never hear the word cooperative. You wouldn't know there was a model of business called cooperative. That has to change, and the way we do it is through these new initiatives that are being driven hard through the blueprint. And there's some very exciting initiatives coming out of the blueprint on sustainability, on participation, on governance, on cooperative capital. This is all being driven by the ICA's blueprint and the work streams we've developed. So please keep your eyes open, and if you come to Congress, the General Assembly in Turkey, you will hear and be, I think, very, very energized by what you hear.
Maybe to add on a different level, which is international level, something which we decided to be involved to, not to only talk in between cooperators, is we decided that it was time for the movement, not only the ICA. ICA is just there to speak loud for the movement, to be involved in the international process. So Pauline was explaining, of course, the UN was the first step, but now we're spreading out in different organizations, FAO, ILO, of course, from a long history. On Monday, I go to Geneva to the World Health Organization. So there are different places where we're trying to expand. And I suppose we still have to keep in mind the motto of the international years, co-ops, enterprise to build a better world. We are not against globalization. We want to be part of the process of globalization, but we want to build on our way the globalization. So let me express today a dream. The TPP is in discussion. One member of the contact and study group is our colleague Martin Lowry from United States. In United States, there are co-ops, and their views are not different from yours. Why? And there are different co-ops. You were telling there are co-ops in Korea, there are co-ops in other parts of Asia. Why couldn't we imagine that all co-ops concerned by the TPP, instead of telling we're against the TPP, should put forward to the governments that there should be a provision inside the TPP for co-ops, for expanding co-ops, for expanding cooperative trade in between co-ops among the TPP countries. I believe that would be a real victory.
Thank you very much. So I think for cooperatives, we have to, on the international front and on the domestic front, be more vocal and communicating actively. Now, Monsieur Bancel talked about the audit of cooperatives in France. Can you? Some people wanted to listen more about the audit aspect.
I will try to explain a little more on that question of governance audit. It's not only French. It's something that has existed and that exists in different European countries. In French, we call it révision coopérative, which in the past was very much, in the 19th centuries. So it's a long, long time ago. It was very much focused on accountings, but at that time, accountings was not developed as now. And in the history, this revision, this auditing has shifted to something different, which is what we call cooperative governance auditing, to make sure that your process still stick with the cooperative principles. And the government passed a new law on co-ops last year, a comprehensive law on co-ops, and it was decided by all the French cooperative movement that all co-ops would each 5 years get published, talking to members, but not only to members, to everyone, on this governance auditing. And if you go and you try to understand is how do we go and run on the sustainable development activities, it's how do we work with the community. So it's very close to something which is spreading out in the listed company, the social responsibility report. So why should we let all the others present them so nicely? When you look at the wonderful reports they make on the social responsibility in the big players, it's wonderful, well-pictured and well-written documents. When you try to scrap behind what there is really. So that's what it is, cooperative auditing. So let the accountings to maybe others, except be careful for the standards you will compel with. But there are huge, tremendous questions there, but whatever. So do focus on where we should focus, I believe. Because we have to tell us, in between us, a truth. The others are much more on the forefront than we are on that. So that's also one of the items tackled by the blueprint. We have to tell the truth. So accountability. We have principles. Can we demonstrate that we are running our business in a way which is compatible with the principle? So it's very easy. It's very easy to say. It takes sometimes to shuffle, to do things. But it's very interesting. If ever the Japanese cooperative movement is interested, it would be a pleasure, I'm sure, in COP Europe or in COP FR for the France, to receive any delegation, to work with you, to explain what we're trying. It's just to be open to the public, to explain who we are, really, not letting the others telling who we are.
Thank you very much. Given where we are, I think you have been very informative, indicative. Now, Dame Pauline, there's a headache shared by cooperators. If you grow the size of the organization, some people fear that it will become less democratic because there are formalities and, structures that may hinder the true democracy. So we would appreciate your view on democracy versus size.
Thank you very much. I get this question put to me all over the world, in the media, by politicians, by cooperators. The reality is that a cooperative, no matter its size, however big or however small, is a proper functioning cooperative if it is abiding by the principles. And the reverse is true. A cooperative, no matter how big or small, can be a failed cooperative if it no longer abides by the principles. So you can have a very large cooperative that is fully in touch with its membership, that spends money on its membership. And this is part of the blueprint work that we're doing, because we recognize that efficiency in the modern world is regarded simply as the levels of profitability. And some of the things we have to do to maintain our democratic credentials, to maintain our levels of participation with our owners, our members, cost money that a listed company doesn't have. And yet they have won the debate about how you define efficiency. And we fail it because we spend money on these other things, our democracy, our participation, our community engagement, that makes us look inefficient. So we have had a very useful document written that talks about, for instance, it's a thought leadership piece that starts the thinking with seven cooperative philosophers around the world talking about what is growth and efficiency in a cooperative. We have to start challenging these, what in English we call the sacred cows of the neoliberal approach to profit, which is that, you know, this is all about efficiency. You've got to make your profit, and you can't have all these extraneous costs. We have these costs. They're an essential part of our business, and it doesn't make us inefficient, actually. By our business model, it makes us good, participatory, democratic businesses. So we have to challenge this. Large businesses, many of them, I know many large businesses that are very democratic, that spend a lot of money on their democracy. They make it work properly, and they spend money on their community engagement. They involve major surveys of their members, both at meetings and by email and writing, to ask them what they want to spend their money, the society to spend the money on, the levels of surplus that they've got. They want to know how to spend it. So this can work, and members can see their democratic rights right through to the key decisions being made in the boardroom. That's a good operating cooperative, no matter whether it's huge or whether it's a 7-person cooperative. But if a large cooperative loses its way, loses touch with its members, or a small one, then they will inevitably fail. And when I was the Chief Executive of Cooperatives UK, part of my role was to go around and tell cooperatives that they needed to have a good, live, active membership policy. So if you don't have an active membership policy, you don't have contested elections. And I was seeing cooperatives in the United Kingdom that had the same president for 40 years. Now, I'm sorry, but that is not an efficient, proper performing cooperative. And if you've got them here, I'm sorry if I'm saying that, but it's true. You cannot have a cooperative which has the same people at the helm for 40 years, because that is institutional capture. Whether you're in a cooperative or a stock listed company, it doesn't matter. You have to have contested elections. You have to have fresh blood. To do that, you need an active membership policy. You've got to bring your members with you. You've got to excite them and engage them. And you can do that as cooperatives by using the members you've got, by encouraging them to go out as ambassadors for the movement, talk about it, bring them in to see what your goods you're selling if you're in a consumer co-op, do them a cooking demonstration. You were talking about fair trade earlier. In the consumer movement all across the UK and Fair Trade Week, they have events in every co-op store or on the outskirts of every co-op store for co-ops and fair trade. We're like that. We're together. It's who we are. We mainstreamed fair trade in the co-op movement in the UK. And now all the other retailers are chasing us. They want all their bananas to be fair trade, not just the few fair trade bananas, all of them, all their coffee, all their tea. We started that. And it's growing year on year despite the difficulties of our economy. So these are the things that excite people. And in many countries where this is happening, the size of the co-op movement over the last 5-6 years in dreadful circumstances has grown hugely. So I think that's what it's about. An active membership policy. Get out there and get the people excited about co-ops. And I'm sure it's part of your issue now with your government, they need to see people out there saying to them, hang on, what are you doing with our co-ops? Why are you trying to change this? And you should be able to tap into those people and say, this is what they're trying to do something about it. But if the ordinary people are not even sure they're in a co-op, I went to a White House seminar conducted by the Obama administration, and the chief of staff of the President of the United States came in, and he was asked by one of the US cooperators, are you in a cooperative? He said, no, I'm not in any cooperatives. He said, are you a member of a credit union? Oh, yeah, I'm a member of 2 credit unions. So you're in a cooperative. He didn't even know what a cooperative was. That's the level of ignorance we have to move away from. And it's down to us, this generation of cooperators, to change it, because we owe it to the next generation to change it now.
ありがとうございます。力強い。
Thank you very much. Very compelling, forceful, and encouraging statement. Thank you. I think the next question will have to be the last question. Monsieur Bancel, I think you chair the principal committee. ICA has a principal committee, and you are working on the guidance on the cooperative principles. So could you talk about your efforts? What would it be? And so people are interested about the workings of the principal committee.
Yes, in short, we have in the cooperative movement for more than 120 years now, because this year is going to be the 120th anniversary of the ICA, launched by France and UK at that time, and the Rochdale pioneers and in different countries, they set at that time some principles. So in the history of the cooperative movement, we have tried to enshrine these principles. Last time we did this job was a tremendous job done and voted in 1995 in Manchester. It was a congress, that is to say, meeting all the co-ops around the world. And so now we have 7 principles. It is short. Of course, the problem with the principles, what is the use? Why do we have principles? What is the use of principles, and what can we do with them? So this question was raised just at the time of the International Year. Our colleagues from South America came to the General Assembly, and they wanted to change the last principle, the 7th principle, which is a concern for the community, because they thought it was not tackling enough the question of environment. And okay, it was decided through a process that for nowadays we won't change the principles. But we discovered, and I believe we have to tell some truth also on ourselves, that in between 95 and let's say about 30 years, we didn't do much, or we didn't do enough inside the cooperative movement and even outside to explain why do we have principles, what is the use of those principles. So it was decided that we should have at the ICA board level a committee in charge of setting guidelines for the nowadays. How can we read, how we can adapt the way we act on the everyday business with the principles. Of course, it is a bit difficult question because it has to adapt it. Different countries, north, south, east, west, different size, different population, different history, different culture. It has to adapt to different sectors. What is there in common in between health co-ops, agriculture co-ops, and so on? So we are trying to do that. And we're working not too bad, I think. I'm not very objective, but I think we're... So, and we have to present this in Turkey in November. So we will present for each principle, about no more than 10 pages, okay, trying to give interpretation for nowadays, and of course to try to help people to go forward. The most important things we will propose, not only to the movement, but to everyone, is now to understand that those principles are part of the international law. Those principles are not only vague words to be looked at and revered with some burning incense and telling, okay. No, they are something which are very important, because through the ILO recommendation, through the UN recommendation on the International Year, those principles are parts of the international law the governments have to respect. And of course, the problems they are facing, they have to pay some respect to the international agreements on trade and the cooperative principle. So this is the question for any governments. How do we do both at the same time? Competition and cooperative principle. We believe it is not so difficult, but it has to be done with the cooperative movement. So I believe this is a process we're getting in, that everything will be published after the ICA board meeting in the end of January. It will be spelled out. It will be spelled out in, at least from the ICA Secretariat, in 3 languages, English, French, Spanish, but our colleagues from Japan are members of the committee, so you will get very quickly Japanese versions, for sure. So it is important when you get the documents, you react, because in Turkey, you'll have the opportunity to work and to express yourself on those guidelines. But I believe the main steps will be that question of the principle, the international cooperative principles are part of the international law, which has to be respected by every country. That's the most important thing.
Thank you very much. You're beautifully on time. You're an excellent timekeeper as well, sir. Yes, as a moderator, I must wrap up the session. But I must say the following. In May of last year, the Regulatory Council came up with the recommendation. And the recommendation included very strange phrases like demutualization of Zenno. What? Who's going to... there was no subject. Would the government demutualize Zenno? So they were very strange document. So eventually, the government has changed a little bit, and they are listening more to the views of the cooperators as they are going to plan the demutualization. But the policymakers does not realize that the recommendation didn't make any sense at all, and the policymakers were not paying any attention to the principles of the cooperative movement. And that's worrying me. And also the academic society has expressed that they are against the interference of the government into the autonomy and independence of cooperative movement. Now, we are an organization, independent, autonomous, and we cannot allow anyone to destroy that or to interfere us. And I think that is the shared thought of everyone in this room. I'm afraid we were not able to respond to all the questions, but I think with a sense of gratitude, I would like to close the session by thanking the 3 speakers. Pauline Green, the President of ICA, Monsieur Vincel, and Professor, thank you very much. And also to Mr. Shiga, the moderator. Through lectures and Q&A, I think we are now with a better understanding of how we should move forward. So with this, I would like to close the seminar, and we would like to thank your attendance.